Story number 2. A Comedy on the Gold Coast. It was 5 o'clock in an afternoon in mid-September, and a couple of American millionaires, they abounded that year, the millionaires, sat chatting together on the wide terrace which separates the entrance to the carousel from the promenade. Some yards away, against the balustrade of the terrace, on the natural, unconsidered altitude of one to whom short frocks are a matter of history, certainly but very recent history, stood a charming and imperious girl. You could see that she was eating chocolate while meditating upon the riddle of life. The elder millionaire glanced at the very pretty woman, within a few exceptions only of the girl. But his companion seemed to be intent on counting the girl's chocolates. The immense crystal dome on the Curacao dominated the Gold Coast, and on either side of the great building were stretched out in a straight line of hotels, restaurants, and cafes, the shops, the theaters, the concert halls, and the pawnbrokers of the city of pleasure, Ostend. At one extremity of that long array of ornate white architecture, which resembled the icing on a bride's cake more than the roofs of men, was the palace of a king, and the other were the lighthouse and the railway signals which guided into the city the continuously arriving cargoes of wealth, beauty, and desire. In front, the ocean, grey and lethargic, idly beats in the little genteel foam on the promenade for some wetting of pink feet in stylish bathing costumes. And after a hard day's work, the sun, by arrangement with the authorities during August and September, was setting over the sea exactly opposite the superb portals of the Curacao. The younger of the millionaires was Cecil Thorold. The other was a man 55 or so, was Simeon Rainshore, father of the girl at the balustrade and president of the famous Dry Goods Trust of exciting memory. The contrast between the two men, alike only in extreme riches, was remarkable. Cecil, still youthful, slim, dark, languid of movement, with delicate features, eyes almost Spanish and an accent of purest English, and Rainshore, with a nasal twang, his snout frame, his rounded, bluish-red chin, and little eyes of that demeanor of false briskness which, by means of aging men, seek to prove themselves that they are as young as ever they were. Simeon had been a friend and opponent of Cecil's father's. In former days, those twain had victimized each other for colossal sums. Consequently, Simeon had been glad to meet the son of his dead antagonist, and in less than a week of Ostend repose, despite a fundamental disparity of temperament, the formidable president and of the Europeanized wanderer had achieved a sort of intimacy, an intimacy which was about to be intensified. "The difference between you and I is this," Cecil said. "You exhaust yourself by making money among men who are all bent on making money, in a place specifically set apart for that purpose. I amuse myself by making money among men who have made or inherited money, and are bent on spending it in places specifically set apart for that purpose. I take people off their guard. They don't precisely see me coming. I don't rent an office and put up a sign, which is the equivalent to announcing that the rest of the world had better look out for itself. Our codes are the same, but it is not my way more original and diverting. Look at this place. Half of the wealth of Europe is collected here. The other half is in travel. The entire coast reeks of money. The sands are golden with it. If only put in your hand so." "So?" ejaculated Rainshore quizzically. How so? Show me." That would be telling. I guess you wouldn't get much of the truth out of Simeon, not as much as your father did." "Do you imagine I should try?" said Cecil gravely. "My amusements are always discreet." "But you confess you are often bored. Now, on Wall Street, we are never bored." "Yes," Cecil admitted. "I embarked on these enterprises mainly to escape boredom." "You ought to marry," said Rainshore pointedly. "You ought to marry my friend." "I have a yacht." "No doubt, and she's a beauty, and feminine too, but not feminine enough. You ought to marry. Now I'll—" Mr. Rainshore paused. His daughter had suddenly ceased to eat chocolates, and was leaning over the balustrade in order to converse with a tall young man whose fair, tanned face and white hat overtopped the carved masonry, and were thus visible to the millionaires. The latter glanced at one another and then glanced away, each slightly self-conscious. "I thought Mr. Lowry had left," said Cecil. "He came back last night," Rainshore replied curtly, "and he leaves again tomorrow night." "Well, then it's a match after all," Cecil ventured. "Who says that?" was Simeon's sharp inquiry. "The birds of the air whisper it. One heard it at every corner 3 days ago." Rainshore turned his chair a little toward Cecil's. "You'll allow I ought to know something about it," he said. "Well, I tell you it's a lie." "I'm sorry I mentioned it," Cecil said, apologized. "Not at all," said Simeon, stroking his chin. "I'm glad you did, because now you can just tell all the birds of the air direct from me that this particular case there isn't going to be the usual alliance between the beauty and dollars of America and the aristocratic blood of Great Britain. Listen right here," he continued confidently, like a man whose secret feelings have been inconvenienced him for several hours. "This young spark, mind, I have nothing against him, asked me to consult in his engagement with Geraldine. I tell him that I intend to settle $500,000 on my daughter, and that the man who she marries must cover that $500,000 with another. He says he has 1,000 a year of his own, pounds, just nice for Geraldine's gloves and candy, and that he is the heir of his uncle, Lord Lowry, and that there is an entail, and this Lord Lowry is very rich, very old, and very unmarried, but that, also being very peculiar, he won't come down with any money. It occurs to me to remark, suppose Lord Lowry marries and develops into a father of a man-child. Where do you come in, Mr. Van Lowry? Oh-ho, Lord Lowry, merry, impossible, laughable. Then Geraldine begins to worry at me, and her mother too, and so I kind of issue an ultimatum, namely, I will consent to an engagement without a settlement, if, on the marriage, Lord Lowry will give me a note of hand for $500,000 to Geraldine, payable on his marriage. See, the lord's nephew goes off to persuade my lord, and returns with my lord's answer in an envelope sealed with a great seal. I open it and I read, this is what I read. To Mr. S. Rainshore, American draper. Sir, as a humorist you rank high. Accept the admiration of your obedient servant Lowry. The millionaire laughed. Oh, it's clever enough, said Rainshore. It's very English and grand. Dashed if I don't admire it. All the same, I've requested Mr. Van Lowry, under the circumstances, to quit this town. I didn't show him the letter. No, I spared his delicate feelings. I merely told him Lord Lowry had refused, and that I would be ready to consider his application favorably any time when he happened to have $500,000 in his pocket. And Miss Geraldine? She's flying the red flag, but she knows when my back's against the wall. She knows her father. She'll recover. Great Scott, she's 18. He's 21. The whole affair is in the high farce. And moreover, I want Geraldine to marry an American, after all. And if she elopes? Cecil murmured to himself, gazing at the set features of this girl, who was now alone once more. Elopes? Rainshore's face reddened, and his mood shifted suddenly from indulgent cynicism to profound anger. Cecil was amazed at the transformation until he remembered to have heard long ago that Simeon himself had eloped. "It was just a fancy that flashed into my mind," Cecil smiled diplomatically. "I should let it flash out again if I were you," said Rainshore with a certain grimness. And Cecil perceived the truth of the maxim that the parent can never forgive his own fault in his children. Part 2. "You've come to sympathize with me," said Geraldine Rainshore calmly, as Cecil, leaving the father for a few moments, strolled across the terrace towards the daughter. "In my honest, kindly face it gives me away," he responded lightly. "But what am I to sympathize with you about?" "You know that," said the girl briefly. They stood together near the balustrade, looking out over the sea into the crimson eye of the sun, and all the afternoon activities of Ostend were surging around them, the muffled sound of musical instruments from within the carousel, the shrill cries of late bathers off the shore, the toot of the tramway horn to the left and the roar of the siren to the right, and everywhere the ceaseless hum of an existence at once gay, feverish, and futile. But Cecil was conscious of nothing but the individuality by his side. Some women, he reflected, are older than 18, than they are 38, and Geraldine was one of those. She happened to be very young and very old at the same time. She might be immature, crude, even gawky in her girlishness, but she was just then in the first flush of mentality, realizing the absolute independence of human spirit. She had force, and she was also the enterprise to act on it. As Cecil glanced at her intelligent, expressive face, and thought of her playing with life just like a child plays with a razor. "You mean," he inquired, "I mean that father has been talking about me, do you? I could tell in his eyes. Well?" "Your directness unnerves me," he smiled. "Pull yourself together then, Mr. Thorold. Be a man." "Will you let me treat you as a friend?" "Why, yes," she said, "if you'll promise not to tell me I'm only 18. "I am incapable of such rudeness," Cecil replied. "A woman as old as she feels. You feel at least 30, therefore you are at least 30. This being understood, I am going to suggest, as a friend, that if you and Mr. Val Lowry are perhaps pardonably contemplating any extreme step." "Extreme step, Mr. Thorold?" "Anything rash." "Are we supposed to be?" Geraldine demanded, raising her chin scornfully and defiantly and dangling her parasol. "I should respectfully and confidentially advise you to refrain. Be content to wait, my dear middle-aged woman. Your father may relent, and also, I have a notion that I may be able to help us? Possibly." "You are real good," said Geraldine coldly. "But what gave you the idea that Harry and I were meaning to—" "Something in your eyes, your fine, daring eyes. I read you as you read your father, you'll see." "Well then, Mr. Thorold, there's something wrong with my fine, daring eyes. I'm just the last girl in all America to do anything rash. Why, if I did anything rash, I'm sure I would feel ever afterwards as if I wanted to be excused off of the very face of the earth. I'm that sort of girl. Do you think I don't know that my father will give way? I guess he's just got to. With the time and hammering, you can knock sense into the head of any parent." "I apologize," said Cecil, both startled and convinced. "And I congratulate Mr. Val Lowry." "Say, you like Harry, don't you?" "Oh, very much. He's the ideal type of Englishman." Geraldine nodded sweetly. "It's so obedient. He does everything I tell him. He is leaving for England tonight, not because father asked him to, but because I did. I'm going to take Mother to Brussels for a few days shopping. Nice, That will give Father the opportunity to meditate in solitude on his own greatness. Tell me, Mr. Thorold, do you consider that Harry and I would be justified in corresponding secretly? Cecil assumed the pose of judicial gravity. I think you would, he decided, but don't tell anyone I said so. Not even Harry? She ran off into the carousel, saying she must seek her mother. But instead of seeking her mother, Geraldine passed straight through the concert hall where 1,001 wondrously attired women were doing fancy needlework to accompaniment of a hand of music, and to a maze of corridors beyond, and so to the rear entrance of the carousel on the boulevard Van Ingelsom. Here she met with Mr. Harry Lowry, who was most obviously waiting for her. They crossed the road to the empty tramway waiting room and entered it and sat down. And by the mere act of looking into each other's eyes, these two, a stiff, simple, honest-faced young Englishman with Oxford written all over him, and a charming child of civilization equally proud, but with fewer conventions, suddenly transformed into a little Cupid's bower. Just as I thought, you darling boy, Geraldine began to talk rapidly. Father's the least bit of this world scared, and when he's scared he's bound to confide in someone, and he's confided in that sweet Mr. Thorold. Mr. Thorold has been requested to reason with me and advise me to do a good girl and wait. I know what that means. It means that Father thinks we shall soon forget each other, my poor Henry, and I do not believe that it means my father wants me to marry Mr. Thorold. What did you say to him, dear? The lover demanded, pale. Trust me to fool him, Henry. I simply walked around him. He thinks we're going to be very good and wait patiently, as if Father would ever give away anything until he was forced. She laughed disdainfully. So we're perfectly safe so long as we act with discretion. Today's Monday. You return to England tonight. Yes, and I'll arrange about the license and things. Your cousin Mary is just as important to the license, Harry, said Geraldine primly. She will come. You may rely on her being at Ostend with me on Thursday. Very well. In the meantime, I'll behave as if life is a blank. Brussels will put off the scent. Mother and I will return from there on Thursday afternoon. That night, there is a soirée détente at the Curacao. Mother will say she is too tired to go to it, but she will have to go all the same. I will dance before all men till 9:45, and I will even dance with Mr. Thorold. Oh, what a pity I can't dance before Father, but he's certain to be in the gambling rooms and winning money. He always is at that hour. At 9:45 I will slip out, and you'll be there at the back door with the carriage. We drive to the quay, and just catch me an 11.5 steamer, and I meet your cousin Mary. On Friday morning we are married, and then we shall talk in a position to talk to my father. He'll pretend to be furious, but he can't say much, because he eloped himself. Didn't you know? I didn't, said Harry with a certain dryness. Oh, yes, it's in the family. But you needn't look so starched, my English lord. He took her hand. I'm sure your uncle won't disinherit you or anything horrid like that. He can't, said Harry. What a perfectly lovely country England is, Geraldine exclaimed. Fancy the poor old thing not being able to disinherit you. Why, it's too delicious for words. And for some reason or other, he kissed her violently. Then an official entered the bureau and asked if they wanted to go to Blankenberg, because if so, the tram was leaving, their distinguished pleasure. They looked at each other foolishly and sidled out, and the bureau ceased to be a Cupid's bower. Part 3. By Simeon's request, Cecil dined with the Rainshores that night in the Continental. After dinner, they sat out on the balcony and sustained themselves with coffee while watching the gay traffic on the Danube, the brilliant illumination of the Curacao, and the distant lights of the invisible but murmuring sea. Geraldine was in one of her moods of philosophic pessimism, and would persist in dwelling on the uncertainty of riches and the vicissitudes of millionaires. She found a text in the famous Bowring case, which, of course, the newspaper contained many interesting details. "I wonder if he'll be caught," she remarked. "I wonder," said Cecil. "What do you think, Father?" "I think you had better go to bed," Simeon replied. The chit rose and kissed him duteously. "Good night," she said. "Aren't you glad the sea keeps so calm?" "Why?" "Can you ask? Mr. Vallow crosses tonight, and he's dreadfully a bad sailor." "Come along, Mother. Mr. Thorold, when Mother and I return from Brussels, we shall expect to be taking a cruise to the Carabao." Simeon sighed with a relief upon desperation of his family, and began a fresh cigar. On the whole, his day had been rather too domestic. He was quite pleased when Cecil, having apparently by accident broached the subject of dry goods trust, proceeded to exhibit minute curiosity concerning the past, the present, and the future of the greatest of all the Rainshore enterprises. "Are you thinking of coming in?" Simeon demanded at length, pricking up his ears. "No," said Cecil. "I'm thinking of going out. The fact is, I haven't mentioned it before, but I'm ready to sell a very large block of shares." "The deuce you are!" Simeon exclaimed. "And what do you call a very large block?" "Well," Cecil said, "it would cost me nearly $500,000 to take them up now." "Dollars?" "Pounds, sterling. 25,000 shares. It's 95 and 3/8. Rainshore whistled 2 bars of "Follow Me" from the Belle of New York. "Is this how you amuse yourself at Ostend?" he inquired. Cecil smiled. "This is quite the exceptional transaction, and not too profitable either." "But you can't dump that lot on the market," Simeon protested. "Yes, I can," said Cecil. "I must, and I will. There are reasons, but you yourself wouldn't be care to handle it, I suppose." The president of the trust pondered. "I'll handle it at 93 and 3/8, he answered quietly. "Oh, come, that's dropping 2 points, said Cecil, shocked. "A minute ago you were prophesying a further rise." Rainshore's face gleamed out momentarily of the darkness as he puffed his cigar. "If you must unload," he remarked, as if addressing the red end of a cigar, "I'm your man at 93 and 3/8. Cecil argued, but Simeon Rainshore never argued. It was not his method. In a quarter of an hour, the younger man had contracted to sell 25,000 shares of $100 each in the United States Dry Goods Trust at 2 points below the current market quotation, and 6 5/8 points below par. The hoot of the outgoing steamer sounded across the city. "I must go," said Cecil. "You're in a mighty hurry," Simeon complained. Part 4. 5 minutes later, Cecil was in his own rooms at the Hotel de Plague. Soon there was a discreet knock at his door. "Come in, Nucky," he said. It was the servant who entered, the small, thin man with very mobile eyes and of no particular age, who in various capacities and incarnations was now a liftman, now as a financial agent, and now as, no matter what, assisted Cecil in his diversions. "Mr. Val Lowry really did go by the boat, sir." "Good. Have you given directions about the yacht?" "The affair is in order." "And you've secured one of Mr. Rainshore's Homburg hats?" "It is in your dressing room. There was no mark of indication on it, so in order to smooth the difficulties of the police when they find it on the beach, I have taken the liberty of writing Mr. Rainshore's name on the lining." "A kindly thought," said Cecil. "You'll catch a special GSN steamer direct for London at 1 a.m. That will get you into town before 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. Things have turned out as I expected. I have nothing else to say to you, but before leaving me, perhaps you had better repeat your instructions." "With pleasure, sir," said Lecce. "Tuesday afternoon, I call the Cloak Lane and intimate that we want to sell dry goods shares. I ineffectually try to conceal a secret cause for alarm, and I am gradually to disclose the fact that we are very anxious indeed to sell really a lot of dry goods shares in a hurry. I permit myself to be pumped, and the information is wormed out of me that Mr. Simeon Rainshore has disappeared, as possibly lately committed suicide, but that at present no one is aware of this except ourselves. I express doubts to the soundness of the trust, and I remark that the unfortunateness of his disappearance so soon after the lamentable tragic panic connected with the lately vanished Bruce Bowing and his companies. I send our friends on change with orders to see that they get to you and to report. I then go to Birchen Lane and repeat the performance there without variation. Then I call the city office of the Evening Messenger and talk privately to the despondent Vane with the financial editor concerning the trust. But I breathe not a word as to Mr. Rainshore's disappearance. Wednesday morning, the rotten dry goods has set sharply, but I am now very foolishly disposed to haggle about the selling price. Our friends urge me to accept what I can get, and I leave them saying I must telegraph you. Wednesday afternoon, I see a reporter at the Morning Journal just to let out that Mr. Rainshore has disappeared. The Journal will wire to Ostend for confirmation, which confirmation it will receive. Thursday morning, the bottom is knocked out of the price of dry goods shares. Then I had to call on our other friends, Throgmorton Street, and tell them to buy. In London, New York, Paris, and everywhere. "Go in peace," said Cecil. "If we are lucky, the price will drop to 70. Part 5. "I see, Mr. Thorold," said Geraldine Rainshore, "that you are about to ask me for the next dance, and it is yours." "You are the queen of diverseness," Cecil replied, bowing. It was precisely 9:30 on Thursday evening, and they had met in a corner of the pillared and balconied Salle de Danse, in the carousel behind the concert hall. The slippery, glaring floor was crowded with dancers, the men in ordinary evening dress, the women very variously attired, save that nearly all wore picture hats. Geraldine was in a white frock, high at the neck, with a large hat of black velvet, and amidst the brilliant, multicolored, light-hearted throng, lit by a blaze of the electric chandeliers, and swayed by the irresistible melody of the Doctrinen waltz, the young girl, simply dressed as she was, easily held her own. "So you've come back from Brussels?" Cecil said, taking her arm and waist. "Yes, we just arrived on time for dinner. But what have you been doing with Father? We've seen nothing of him." "Ah," Cecil said mysteriously, "we've gone on a little voyage like you, and you've only just returned." "And the Clarabelle?" He nodded. "You might have waited," she pouted. "Perhaps you shouldn't have liked it. Things happened, you know." "Why, what? Do tell me." "Well, you left your poor father alone, and he was moping all day on Tuesday. So Tuesday night I had the happy idea of going out with him on the yacht to witness a sham night attack on the French Channel Squadron on Calais. I caught your honored parent just as he was retiring to bed, and we went. He was only too glad, but we hadn't been left in the harbor much more than an hour and a half when our engines broke down." "What fun! At night, too?" "Yes, wasn't it? The shaft was broken, so we didn't see much of the night attack at Calais. Fortunately, the weather was all that the weather ought to be when a ship's engines break down. Still, it took us over 40 hours to repair. Over 40 hours! I'm proud that we were able to do the thing without being ignominiously towed into port. But I fear your father may have grown a little impatient, though we had excellent views of the Ostend and Dunkirk, and the passing vessels were a constant diversion." Was he eating plenty? Geraldine asked simply. Oh, ample. Father wouldn't really mind. When did you land? About an hour ago. Your father did not expect to see you tonight, I fancy. He dressed and went straight to the tables. He has to make up for that lost night, you see. They danced in the silence for a few moments, and then suddenly Geraldine said, Well, excuse me, I feel tired. Good night. The clock under the orchestra showed 17 minutes to 10. Instantly, he inquired. Instantly, and the girl added with a hint of mischief in her voice as she shook hands. I look on you as quite a friend since our little talk. You will excuse me for this abruptness, won't you? He was about to answer when a sort of commotion arose near behind them. Still holding her hand, he turned to look. Why, he said, it's your mother. She must be unwell. Mrs. Rainshore, stout and robed, as always, in tight, sumptuous black, sat among a little bevy of chaperons. She held a newspaper in trembling hands and was an utter succession of staccato oh-ohs. With everyone in the vicinity gazed at her with alarm. Then she dropped the paper and, murmuring, Simeon's dead, sank gently into the polished floor just as Cecil and Geraldine approached. Geraldine's first instinctive move was to seize the newspaper, which was the day's Paris edition of the New York Herald. She read the headlines in a flash. Strange disappearance of Simeon Rainshore. Suicide feared. Takes advantage of his family's absence. Heavy drop in dry goods. Shares at 72 and still falling. Part 6. My good Rebecca, I assure you that he's alive. This was Mr. Rainshore's attempt to calm the hysteric sobbing of his wife, who had recovered from her short swoon with a little retreat of the person who had told Tachenice's picture cards and French novels between the main corridor and the reading rooms. Geraldine and Cecil were also in the tiny chamber. As for this, Simeon continued, kicking the newspaper, it's a singular thing that the man can't take a couple days off without upsetting the entire universe. What should you do in my place, Thorold? This is the fault of your shaft. I should buy dry goods shares, said Cecil. And I will. There was an imperative knock at the door. The official police entered. Monsieur Rainshore? The same. I have received telegraphs from New York and London to demand if you are dead. I am not. I am still alive. But Monsieur's hat was found on the beach. My hat? It carries Monsieur's name. Then it isn't mine, sir. Mais commandant. I tell you that it isn't mine, sir. Don't be angry, Simone, his wife pleaded between her sobs. The exit of the official was immediately followed by another summons for administration, even more imperative. The lady entered and handed Simone a card. Miss Eve Forecastle, The Morning Journal. My paper, she began. You wish to know if I exist, madam? Said Simone. Miss Castle caught sight of Cecil Thorold, paused, bowed stiffly. Cecil bowed. He also blushed. I continue to exist, madam, Simeon proceeded. I have not killed myself, but homicide of sort is not improbable if... In short, madam, good night. Miss Fincastle, with a long, searching, silent look at Cecil, departed. Bolt the door, Simon said to his daughter. Then there was a third knock, followed by a hammering. Go away, Simon commanded. Opens the door, pleaded a muffled voice. It's Harry, Geraldine whispered solemnly in Cecil's ear. Please go and call him. Tell him it's too late tonight. Cecil went astounded. What has happened to Geraldine? Cried the boy, extremely excited in the corridor. There are all sorts of rumors. Is she ill? Cecil gave an explanation, and in his turn asked for another one. "You look unnerved," he said. "What are you doing here? What is it? Come and have a drink and tell me all, my young friend." And when, over cognac, he had learnt the details of which scheme had no connection with his own, he exclaimed with the utmost sincerity, "The minx! The minx!" "What do you mean?" inquired Harry Lowry. "I mean that you and the minx have had your nearest possible shave of ruining your united careers. Listen to me. Give it up, my boy. I'll arrange things. You delivered a letter to the father-in-law of your desire a few days ago. I'll give you another one to deliver, and I fancy the result will be different." The letter which Cecil wrote ran thus. "Dear Rainshore, I enclose a check for £100,000. Represents part of the gold that can be picked up on the Gold Coast by putting one's own hand out. So, you observe that it is dated the day after the next settling day of the London Stock Exchange. I contracted on Monday to sell you 25,000 shares of a certain trust at 93 3/8. I did not possess the shares then, but my agents have today bought them for me at the average price of 72. I stand to realize, therefore, more than $500,000. The round $500,000 Mr. Van Lowry happens to bring to you in his pocket. You will not forget to promise to him that when he did so, you would consider his application favorably. I wish to make no profit out of the little transaction, but I will venture to keep the balance for out-of-pocket expenses, such as mending the Claribel shaft. How convenient it was to have a yacht that will break down when required. The shares will doubtless cover in due course, and I hope the reputation of the trust may not suffer, and that, for the sake of old times with my father, you will regard this episode with its proper light and bear me no ill will. Yours sincerely, C. Thorold. The next day, the engagement of Mr. Harry Nigel Selincourt Lowry and Miss Geraldine Rainshore was announced on 2 continents.